What the Pel is up, everybody? This is Pelicans Plus with Elliot Clough at Elliot Clough on Twitter, and we're going live for a second time today. So lucky you. Billy Reinhardt joining us today from Nets Daily. We're talking a little bit about Jacque Vaughn. Make sure you go follow him on Twitter as well. That's in the ticker at the bottom. Excellent NBA content, not just Nets. So if you have any thoughts while we're going along here as well in terms of what Jacque Vaughn would bring to the table for the Pelicans, let us know in the comments. So, Billy, we appreciate you joining us. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, how you feeling about your Nets right now after that exit in the semifinals? An incredible series from the Nets and the Bucks.
Yeah, it was a fantastic series. It's always frustrating when you get eliminated, but I think given the circumstances of all the unfortunate injuries, not only to the Nets, to other teams around the league, but specifically the Nets. I mean, they built their talent base up to be able to withstand a big injury, but they got two big injuries to two of their best three players, and ultimately it was too much in the end. But they went 7 games and plus an overtime against the Bucks, who are my pick to win it all at this point. So that just shows you how deep and how talented the Nets really were, and I really think it was their year had they not been injured. But got to kick the can down to the next year, and I think they go into next year as the favorites. So that's got to be encouraging for the team.
For those of you who follow along on Boot Crew Media and our NBA coverage, they know that the Nets were my pick to go to the finals too and win 4-1 over the Suns. So if they weren't going to make it, definitely picking the Bucks right now. And obviously us Pelicans fans were rooting for Jrue Holiday. But that, I tell you, man, that shot at the end of regulation by KD was absolutely bonkers. I bet you were going nuts.
It was one of those shots where you're like, okay, the Nets are not going to lose this game now. It felt like cinema. That's what I keep saying. Like, it felt like everything was there. Like, KD willed this team to a 7th game by himself. He's playing 48 minutes for basically the last 3-4 games of the series. And then he hits that shot at the end of the game. And at first, a lot of people thought it was a game winner. And it just so happened to just cross the line. But, I mean, that was just an iconic shot. And you thought going into overtime on their home court with that momentum with KD, that the Nets couldn't possibly lose, and then they just went cold. He ran out of gas. He airballed that final shot. He just had nothing left in his legs. But that's why when you look back, it was like, what an enjoyable basketball experience, especially that Game 7. And it was such an iconic shot. But ultimately they lost. But it's hard to be super upset about it just because of how injured they were, and they really gave it their all.
That they did. And another name that was involved with the Nets this year, Jacque Vaughn. That's who we're joining here to talk about today. Vaughn, an assistant this last year, the associate head coach, if I'm remembering correctly, was the head coach a little bit last season for their run in the bubble. And I'm just going to hit you right with it. Would you endorse Jacque Vaughn as a head coach, to be a head coach right now?
For sure. I mean, he had one real other head coaching opportunity besides the interim job with the Nets last year, and that was with Orlando. When he was hired at Orlando, it was kind of the aftermath of Dwight Howard getting traded. That team was in transition. He was one of the youngest coaches in the league, former player, was an assistant with the Spurs for a couple of years, seen as one of the brighter minds in the league. And he got hired maybe prematurely with Orlando with not the best circumstances, and it didn't really work out down there. But I think he's grown as a coach. He's been with the Nets since Sean Marks took over. So he was with Kenny Atkinson from day one. I think it was 2016 when they came in. So he's been an assistant for years now with a really good organization by all accounts. And he's seen some changing rosters. He's been tasked with being kind of the defensive coordinator for the Nets. He's also been big on the development of the guards. So he's worked with guys like D'Angelo Russell and Karis LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie over the years and really helped develop those guys. So he's a very good communicator. He's humble. He comes off as being very genuine. So I definitely think he could be a good man, especially for the Pelicans with a young roster there.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered all my questions there.
We'll reaffirm him.
So in terms of what he brings to the table and what the Pelicans need, at times, I mean, obviously the point in Zion was kind of innovative last year, and then the actions with JJ and Zion were incredibly fun to watch. But at times the offense was kind of archaic. We had Jamal McMillan, son of Nate McMillan, on the podcast in the fall, I think, or it wouldn't have been the fall, obviously. It was probably January or February. And what he said in terms of what the Pelicans were doing for their offense was everything is hard. Everything is difficult. And it comes down a lot to Brandon Ingram having to force a shot. It progressively got better. I think a lot of people would say, especially with the institution of Point Zion. But what does he bring to the table? You mentioned defense, but do you think he'll be a little bit more innovative? Do you think, obviously you mentioned development in terms of the point guard position too. What does he bring on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, he seemed very open to in that bubble experience last year and towards the end of the year. And if you remember, the bubble Nets were a very mixed match group of players. It wasn't really the Nets. They signed so many guys off the scrap heap just for the bubble experience there. And they didn't have a lot of talent. They had Karis LeVert and Jared Allen and Joe Harris, and then just misfits all over. So he kind of tried to cater what they could do to that roster, which I think is a good sign for any coach. You don't want a coach that's coming in so strict to how he wants to play things, and he can't adapt to the roster. So I think he showed there that he's willing to make some adjustments, and he kind of took the reins off of Karis, where Karis, obviously, analytically, you want to take a lot of threes. You want to get to the rim. You don't want to take as many mid-range. But when Karis is your go-to guy in the bubble, I mean, he just kind of unleashed him in terms of allowing him to shoot the mid-range, and he really thrived in that area. So something like that, I think, is beneficial. And with the Pelicans, I think a lot of it, Jacque Vaughn's going to bring a good thing to that team, but I think they need to change some things on that roster. Like, I think it's too early with Brandon Ingram and Zion to look to blow them up, because I think they're both extremely talented together, but I don't love how they fit together, because I think Zion needs to be more of like your offensive 5 next to a floor spacing 4. And I think Brandon Ingram's probably best and can really show his athletic ability against small ball 4s. So I think together, if they're at your 4-5, you don't really have enough defense. So I don't really love how they fit together, but I think you got to give it another year or two with them, because they're so talented. But they need to add some shooting. Like you mentioned, JJ Redick, that helped Zion last year, but JJ Redick's not there anymore. They got to add some shooters, because that really helps offensive creativity. If you have shooters, you can run a lot of different actions, even as decoys, and then that can really allow Zion and Brandon Ingram to explode. Because even against the Nets and other games I saw them play, I love Brandon Ingram's game personally. I think he's going to continue to grow. I think he's so skilled. It's players at his size profile don't come along too often, but I think he needs a little more space out there. And if he's playing kind of a small ball 4 against some bigger players, he'll be able to get to the rim more, get some more efficient shots, some easier looks. Otherwise, when they got Zion and Steven Adams in the front line, he's kind of forced to play on the perimeter, because there's not a lot of spacing, and he's taking all these contested mid-range jumpers, which he can do, but it's just not making it easy for your best players.
Yeah, you're telling me, man. It was a rough year in terms of the offense. But you raised the point of the defense being an issue. Should he play a small ball 4 and Zion be in the 5? And we also know that Zion doesn't particularly like to play in the post. He's had the ball in his hands a lot, so it would take some work for Zion, I think, to be happy in a situation like that. I think we saw him not this previous season, but the season before that, as somebody who was attacking the rim pretty frequently. And it's not like Derek Favors made that easy, having him in there. And it's not like he played a ton of minutes, though, either. So a lot of things. I mean, the shooting is obviously priority number 1 going to the
I think they should look at Miles Turner or Porzingis to see if they can get one of those two guys. I think they fit like a glove, because you could still stay big, but offensively you're spread out. Miles Turner specifically defensively can help protect the rim and kind of make up for Zion being a stocky player, but not necessarily a long player. So I think those two would be the perfect fits. Even though they need guards, I think if you can get one of those two guys and pour some assets into that, it's definitely a great start.
I like Turner. The Kristaps Porzingis contract, plus the list of injuries, and the fact that he wasn't happy with Luka Doncic. Like, how are you going to be happy with Zion and Brandon Ingram? I don't see that working out. But anyway, but I do like the Turner point. That's been a point of conversation pretty much since the Pels got Zion. But anyway, the thing that you mentioned about him being able to be successful with different lineups, with different rosters, is really important, because we've seen a lot of roster turnover over the last 2 or 3 years. And not like that's going to continue to happen, especially when the Pels finally somewhat figure it out and start winning. Which, well, we hope that happens. But that's what intrigued me about Billy Donovan last year, too, because he had so many different teams with the Thunder, and he just always won, was always in the playoffs. So that was a big piece that had a lot of people wanting him in New Orleans. And so that's encouraging to hear about Jacque Vaughn. Now, defensively, he was the defensive coordinator for the Nets for a little bit as well. You mentioned offense being able to switch things up and tailor to the roster. Do you think that is also something that applies to the defense?
Yeah, I think so. It's tough to tell because you have so many different voices with the Nets, and it's a collaborative approach, and it kind of depends on the personnel of your roster. I think ideally most teams here in 2021 want to be able to switch everything, but not every team has the personnel to do that. I'm not sure the Pelicans do, especially if they want to stay big with Steven Adams. But I think Jacque Vaughn, like I said, he's someone that's adaptable. He's someone that's humble enough to not be stuck in his ways, and he'll try and maximize that roster. So, like I said, I think everyone would love to switch. I'm not sure if the Pelicans have that personnel at the moment, but I think Vaughn will definitely put them in a position to succeed.
That sounds good, and in terms of being stubborn and stuck in your ways, hearing that somebody is willing to switch things up is certainly nice after Stan Van Gundy. Because that dude,
yeah, the one thing I will say about Vaughn that I'm remembering now, because it's been a long couple of years, especially with the Nets, with all the turnover they've had. Pre-bubble, one of the main differences I noticed defensively with them from Kenny Atkinson to Jacque Vaughn is they started playing up a little bit more defensively. So they're getting into ball handlers a little bit more. And I think that's definitely something you want to see, because the Nets too many times under Kenny Atkinson had all these talented guards in the league just walking up, taking a high screen and uncontested jumpers. And when you really have to fight over that, especially if you're playing a drop coverage. So I thought Vaughn definitely made the proper adjustments. For the Nets last year, I wasn't sure if he was the right man for the job, because I was like, do you fire Kenny Atkinson or part ways with Kenny Atkinson to go to Jacque Vaughn with this star power? I was like, I don't know if that really makes sense. Like, I felt like we were missing something. And it made sense we were missing something. We didn't know Steve Nash was ready to coach. So I think Nash was a better fit to be the head man for this squad. But I think Jacque Vaughn definitely, with a younger team like this, he can relate to the players. I've been impressed with him about that. I think he'd be a good fit with the Pelicans.
So you talk about his being able to relate to the players. We kind of got that from Alvin Gentry, definitely known as a players coach. And then the Pels overcorrected and went to Stan Van Gundy. Do you think Vaughn can be sort of a middle ground, or does he lean more towards being a Gentry? I mean, he's younger. Obviously, having him be 46 is way better than having the two previous coaches who are both over the age of 60.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Alvin Gentry, I think over the years, he's been known as a really good offensive mind and just kind of negates defense a lot. He's like likes to play super fast, kind of coming from that D'Antoni scheme. But Jacque Vaughn's a little bit different. I think Jacque Vaughn's a little more principle oriented. He's a little more, how can I say, gritty defensive. I mentioned he was trying to be collaborative with the Nets' approach to the defensive side of the ball, so he kind of leans that direction. So I think you'll get a little bit of a different coach from Alvin Gentry. He could probably be that middle ground for sure. Stan Van Gundy, super bright basketball mind. Really enjoyed him as a broadcaster for TNT, but I just think time might have passed him by in terms of how he approaches team building at this point of his career. So, and I don't think that was the best roster for him to do so either with such a young team. So Stan's a super smart guy. I just don't think it was the right fit. I think Jacque Vaughn could definitely bridge the gap between those two.
That's good to hear. That's something that this team drastically needs in their next head coach, because man, this amount of turnover in the first 3 years of Zion's career it's not indicative of a team that is properly functional or not dysfunctional. Because, I mean, if I wasn't covering the Pels, if I was on the outside, I'd be like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about the continuity there and everything going on with the front office and the coaching staff.
And I also think, which is a big part of it, and the working relationship between the general manager and the coach. I think David Griffin's personality would mesh well with Jacque Vaughn. So, I mean, that's important. I think David Griffin, from what I've heard in the past, he has a lot of respect for how Sean Marks has built the Nets. He took Trajan Langdon with him down to New Orleans. That's a connection that you can't overlook, because Langdon was here when the Nets hired Jacque Vaughn. He knows how the Nets do business. I'm sure he respects him. He's going to know everything he needs to know about Jacque Vaughn. So that's why I thought he had a great chance to get the job last year. Pelicans ultimately went in a different direction, but I do think Jacque Vaughn has a great shot here. Although I want to ask you, I mean, we've heard about Charles Lee and Jacque Vaughn. Mike D'Antoni, I don't think would be a bad option here. I think Mike D'Antoni is a very good coach. I see you making a face here. He's never won a championship, but he's been a perennial winner everywhere he's gone. For a Pelicans team that's kind of had an archaic offense and needs some floor spacing and some modernization, I think D'Antoni would be a good guy there. I mean, and he's a safer pick too where Jacque Vaughn hasn't really proven that he's a good head coach in this league, where if you're looking for some stability for Zion and to really maximize your stars, I think DAntoni would be a good fit, especially if they want to throw those assets in for Damian Lillard. And then you can really talk about DAntoni. But it seems like they're going Vaughn early.
Yeah, DAntoni has been brought up a little bit, not a lot, by some sort. I don't think they're going to interview him. But they went retread with SVG. Then it'd be another retread with DAntoni and a guy who's quite a bit older than the players. And the issue is very much being able to relate and very much being able to communicate. And I'm not saying that DAntoni's not a great communicator or anything like that, but what the Pels are looking for is a coach that can continue to cultivate what they ultimately want to be and then also lead them to where they want to go. And I don't know that I necessarily think DAntoni can be that. And I think the fan base would just be kind of upset if DAntoni was hired.
I get it. He's an older, experienced coach like Stan Van Gundy, but I think they're polar opposites in terms of, I think D'Antoni's super easygoing. He's always gone along with his stars. He's always maximized his talent. He's been honestly a revolutionary in terms of how we view offensive basketball over the last 15 to 20 years. So I'm higher on him than most. I think he's had a ton of success everywhere he's been for the most part, besides the Lakers for a short time. And but yeah, I think he'd be a good option. But I think Jacque Vaughn is definitely another good one for them.
Sure. Even if he gets high, I don't know if he's in the running for the Pacers job. He was last year, I know. But the Nets could be without 3 of their assistant coaches going into next season. That would be pretty wild. But before we continue, or before we talk about that, if we get to it, you answered my question in reference to David Griffin. I don't know if those two specifically have a combination or any sort of relationship, but what we've heard a lot about Griff is that he is a control freak. And there were times where he was caught on camera talking to an assistant, and then the assistant would go over talk to Gentry, and Gentry would go put somebody in. How do you think Jacque Vaughn would handle something like that?
That's interesting. That's another level of control where the general manager is making in-game decisions. I don't know. Trajan Langdon comes from the Nets, and everything they do is super collaborative. They have a lot of voices in the room, and they kind of respect them all, and they take them all into account. So that would be a different thing for Trajan Langdon to deal with David Griffin being his kind of, coworker. I don't know. That's definitely interesting if I'm hearing that. Jacque Vaughn, I don't know how much of that the Nets have in his ear. I know they have obviously the analytics staff, which provides them with different stuff like that going into the game. But in terms of in-game adjustments, it's kind of up to the staff and the coaches. That's the first I'm hearing that. You kind of caught me off guard there. If are giving in-game decisions, that might be a bit much.
Yeah, he definitely wants to influence the rotations and everything like that. And that's why I'm assuming they're going to want to go younger with this hire as well. And a big reason why he and Stan Van Gundy butted heads.
Someone he can control a little bit more if that's how
exactly.
You do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be a big reason why a lot of people saw Teaspoon as being a hire or a young coach like a Charles Lee too, because Griff wants his hands in things, and micromanagement in terms of leadership doesn't work. It's never worked. So I'm nervous about it, but we'll see how that shakes out.
I think look at Jamal Mosley now that he's kind of moving on from the Mavericks. He's another young coach. I think he could fit in potentially well.
Yeah, I actually, so the podcast that I recorded this morning, I'm putting this one out that we're recording right now tomorrow morning, other than the people that watch live. But I talked about Mosley as a off the radar sort of candidate because he interviewed last year too. And I like Mosley a lot. He is a player's coach.
Yeah.
And I think there was a quote from Tim McMahon. I just read it, but I can't remember it exactly. It's something about Mosley can control a locker, or not control, but command a locker room, really get everybody's respect and get everybody's attention. And on top of the fact that he's a player's coach, I would love the fit of a Jamal Mosley.
Yeah, I think he'd definitely be someone they could throw into the running. I think you got to make it as wide of a candidate pool as you could. And even if you don't hire someone, you can learn from a lot of these interviews. I think that's always a valuable thing for a franchise. You bring in a bunch of different smart people, ask them what they think about your team, and you're kind of getting free advice. So usually you're hearing from a lot of different people about what to do.
Right. So we know Jacque Vaughn is a big part of taking the Nets from being a pretty awful team a few years ago and then turning them into a contender. Obviously, you had the additions of KD, Kyrie, James Harden. So that greatly influenced them being a much better team as of late. But you talked about his ability to help in the development of these young guys. Can you speak a little bit more to that? What exactly, and you said Karis LeVert being a mid-range jump shooter. As far as the roster is currently constructed, I know the Pels, Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker got so much better this year. Can he continue to help them with their development?
I think so, especially Alexander-Walker. I mean, with the Nets, he was a guard in his playing days, and he was kind of – the Nets have, as a lot of teams do, they have assistant coaches that are kind of dedicated to specific players. So for pregame warmups or even in practices, Jacque Vaughn spent a lot of time with the Nets guards. So that was Karis LeVert, D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie in prior years. And all those guys really developed by leaps and bounds. And D'Angelo got a max contract. Karis got a big deal. And now he's a premier piece in the trade for James Harden and now for the Pacers going forward. And Spencer Dinwiddie's about to get himself a really nice contract. So the proof is in the pudding there. You don't know how much to credit the coaches in that, but I think the Nets' overall structure and philosophy in developing players definitely helped those guys. I think he allows the players to play to their strengths and play and be free when they play. So whether that's with Karis and D'Angelo, allowing them to shoot mid-range jumpers and just kind of – because I think a lot of players, when they come into the league, especially in this analytic age, they're kind of told what you can and what you can't do. And for a lot of players, they don't have the three ball yet, and they're trying to develop kind of in to out. And D'Angelo and Karis, their strengths were mid-range shooting. And initially when they came to the Nets, they really weren't allowed to take that shot. And I think as they started to progress a little bit more, put in a little more development, and then when they're the lead ball handlers for their squads, they need to have that shot in their arsenal. So he kind of did a good job, from my perspective, of allowing, along with the rest of the coaches, allowing these guys to develop and find their strengths and kind of be free with his approach, where they're a team of principles, but they're not super strict in terms of, I guess, rules. They know they want to get high percentage shots. They want to share the ball. They want to space the floor, drive and kick, but those are the principles they abide by. But at the same time, they're not married to a certain shot selection, I guess. It's just kind of playing under that broad scope.
Okay. Now we got a little bit of that development in. Brandon Ingram needs to continue to develop defensively. So does Zion. Talk about the free growth sort of stuff. Them getting better there. Now, can he turned this team into a win now team while also developing, because they have the talent and who knows what's going to happen this offseason. I'm hoping that there's at least a decently large splash move for Miles Turner. We've talked about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on Twitter and on the podcast today. So is it, I just mentioned it. They want to continue to develop and win now and then ultimately be a team that makes a push for the finals. Is that something that Jacque Vaughn can do for them?
I think it remains to be seen. You could have confidence in. I can't give you a firm answer on that. I mean, he hasn't proven he's a coach of that caliber yet, but I think he has all the traits that you would want to see from a coach. And he's coming from a good organization with the Nets, and before that, the Spurs, before he was in Orlando. So he's learned from a lot of smart people. He's been around a lot of stars in recent years, and he's kind of learned what it takes to win. So you'd hope he's a different coach than he was in Orlando years ago, and the Pelicans would definitely be a better situation with Zion and Brandon Ingram there, and then some of the other young players like Kira Lewis and Alexander Walker and Jackson Hayes. And they have some big contract veterans that allows them to get creative with Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe. So they have some good pieces with the Pelicans. I think next year the goal should be the playoffs. I don't know how high of a seed you can get because the West is definitely going to get better with the Warriors back kind of being close to themselves, and then the Grizzlies will continue to get better, and even the Kings got some talent. Like, there's a lot of teams and the Timberwolves, who were playing 500 basketball when D'Angelo Russell and Karl-Anthony Towns were both healthy. So, and Anthony Edwards is going to get better. So there's a lot of good teams in the Western Conference. So it's tough to say, okay, the Pelicans make it. Who's not going to make it? Maybe the Spurs drop out. But I think the Pelicans have the talent, and that should definitely be the goal. But like you said, I think they need another move or two. They got to add a couple of shooters on the wing. And then the big move is, can you get kind of a lead ball handler if Alonzo leaves? And then a floor spacing five. So they have a few options there. But I think Jacque Vaughn would help, at least in terms of the long-term philosophy of developing Kira Lewis and Alexander Walker. And those guards would definitely improve under his watch, I believe.
So you mentioned the Orlando tenure. I think he went 58 and 161. I literally just saw it. I want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, 58 and 158. So that record, definitely not ideal over 3 seasons. If you were in the position of the Pelicans, knowing what you know about Jacque, that he's had those 6 years to continue to learn and be under Steve Nash or Kenny Atkinson, and now with DAntoni and Ime Udoka, does that record and that time in Orlando still give you any level of concern?
I don't worry about the record so much. I mean, you have to do some background checks and like how was he with the players, how did he get along with management and all that stuff, which we're not obviously privy to. But as long as that all checks out, and I assume it did, given that the Nets brought him in, and Sean Marks is really big on vetting the backgrounds of all the people he brings in. He wants good people in that organization. I really wouldn't worry about the record too much. Like I said, it was the post-Dwight Howard years. It was a rebuild for the Magic. He wasn't given a lot of talent there. And at the end of the day, you could be a great coach, but talent wins in the NBA. That's how you win. So I wouldn't look too deeply into the record there. I think you could throw the record out of the window a lot of times for coaches. You just get an unfortunate situation. Then all of a sudden you look at a guy that started off poorly with the Magic, and then he gets a good job with the Pelicans and they take off. And then in a couple of years from now, he has a positive record. So he has Zion and Brandon Ingram here. He didn't have anyone like that in Orlando. I wouldn't look too deeply into that.
So to wrap it all up, I want to make sure that we get a clear image of what Jacque Vaughn is before the pod's over. So a coach that has done it before, then left Orlando and learned a lot about coaching in the game of basketball in Brooklyn, has done a lot with a bunch of different types of teams. He's a developmental coach, and he looks at players' strengths and continues to develop those. He's a coach that can make a defense better, even though in Brooklyn it was a little more collaborative. He's a communicator, and he's young and can relate to the players. Is that pretty solid, you think? Yeah,
I think it's definitely advantageous that he has had prior head coaching experience. Even though it didn't go great, he's kind of been in that seat before. And he's probably it's a while ago that he was a coach, so he took a few years off now, and he's been an assistant for 6-7 years since, with a good organization. So you'd figure he's learned a lot. So I think he's a great candidate for them. He's very genuine, both with the media and his players. Good communicator, as I said. Seems to have attention to detail on both sides of the ball. Willing to make adjustments. Humble. So he's not one of these coaches that's going to be stuck in his ways, or when the media asks him about an adjustment, he's going to give them a snarky answer. Like, he's a good guy, and he understands the game. He played the game. I think he'll be a good hire for the Pelicans.
There you go. Billy Reinhardt of Nets Daily. Go follow him. You see it there. If you're watching the video, it's at Billy. Is it Reinhardt or Reinhardt?
Reinhardt, yes.
Reinhardt, okay. Hard H. All right, got it. Go follow him on Twitter, and we'll remind you that once we close out the pod. Billy, thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.